I was sitting quietly next to my 7-year-old grandson at my son's second wedding, when the boy suddenly grabbed my hand tightly and whispered, "Grandma, I want to leave right now." I asked him, "What's wrong?" He trembled and replied, "Grandma, you didn't look under the table, did you?" I slowly lowered my gaze and froze. I took my grandson's hand and we got up in silence. "I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached." I was seated in the middle of the wedding hall, a ballroom aglow with candlelight, right beside my little grandson, the boy I love more than life itself. Today was the wedding of my son, Darius, to his second wife, Tamika. My little boy, Caleb, was busy pushing his red toy car back and forth across the immaculate white tablecloth. His clear eyes seemed lost in his own little world, where the noise of the adults around him didn't even register. I looked at him and my heart just melted. I carefully straightened the tiny bow tie at his neck, a gesture as gentle as if I were caressing the memory of his mother, Renee, whose every tender smile I still remember like it was yesterday. The soft melody of the jazz band filled the room, blending with the murmur of conversations and the clinking of wine glasses. The ballroom was decorated with impressive luxury, pristine white roses adorning every table, and the candlelight reflecting off the gleaming silver plates. I glanced up, searching for Darius. He was busy making the rounds from table to table, offering toasts to thank the guests with a radiant smile that seemed to mask the emptiness I knew he still carried in his heart since Renee passed away. In the distance, Tamika, my son's new wife, looked stunning in her beaded wedding dress, posing for photos with her friends. Her smile was perfect, flawless, like she didn't have a care in the world. I looked at her and felt something strange in my chest, a weird sensation, but I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was just being overly sensitive. Waiters moved gracefully between the tables, refilling wine glasses, clearing empty plates, and neatly arranging the napkins. An elderly couple sitting at our table turned to me with a kind smile. "How fast Caleb is growing up," the woman said. "How old is he now, Loretta?" I smiled and replied in a soft voice, "He just turned 7. Time flies." Then I turned to cut a small piece of cake to give to Caleb. The boy looked up, his eyes shining with gratitude, but he immediately lowered his head again and went back to pushing his toy car as if that toy was the only place where he felt safe. Suddenly Caleb stopped. His little hands stopped pushing the car, and his round eyes looked at me with a seriousness that was not normal for him. I was a little startled. A bad feeling ran through my body. He grabbed my hand tightly. His little fingers were ice cold. In an urgent voice he whispered, "Grandma, I want to leave right now." His voice trembled as if he were holding back a fear he couldn't explain. My heart raced. I leaned over him and put a hand on his shoulder. "What's wrong, my boy? Tell me what it is." Caleb shuddered, pressing his lips together. And then he whispered so softly that I had to lean my ear closer to hear him. "Grandma, you didn't look under the table, did you?" His words were like a cold knife that went through my chest. A terrible anguish began to grow inside me, making it hard to breathe. I tried to stay calm and stroked his hair, but his gaze, the panicked look of a boy of just 7, kept me from dismissing it. "It's okay, my love. Let your grandma look," I said, trying to make my voice sound calm to soothe him, even though I felt my own heart was pounding. Carefully, I lifted the edge of the white tablecloth and looked into the dark space under the table, where the wooden legs of the chairs and Caleb's little shoes were swinging. And then I saw it. A small piece of paper folded in 4, lying there, right next to Caleb's chair. It was so small that it was almost lost in the darkness, but its presence chilled my blood. Caleb huddled against me, his little hand gripping my arm as if seeking refuge. I felt his agitated breathing. Every tremor seemed to tell me that something was very wrong. I crouched down completely, and with a trembling hand I picked up the paper. The people around us were still laughing and toasting, but at that instant my entire world shrank until it was just me, Caleb, and that damned paper in my hand. I unfolded it. The dim candlelight on the table was enough to read the scribbled words. "Table 8. Add shrimp to the child's serving." A few words, but they were like a direct punch to my heart. I felt the blood turn to ice in my veins, and the air get stuck in my chest. Caleb is severely allergic to shrimp, something my whole family knows perfectly well. A single piece of shrimp would be enough to put his life in danger. Who could have written this? Who could be so cruel? Right on my son's wedding day. I squeezed Caleb's hand, feeling his little fingers tremble in mine. I shot to my feet, the chair screeching loudly against the polished floor. Every eye turning toward me as dread clawed its way up my throat. The elderly couple nearby stopped talking and looked at me with concern. I hugged Caleb with all my strength, as if I feared he would vanish if I let him go. The laughter and music continued, but for me, everything had become a heavy, suffocating silence. Memories of other times flooded my mind, whisking me away from that gleaming wedding hall and back to the years when our family was whole. I once thought my son's home would always be filled with laughter, but life, like a sudden gust of wind, extinguished that flame of happiness, leaving me with scars that would never heal. I remember Renee, my first daughter-in-law, like I remember the morning sunlight streaming through the window at dawn. Her smile was so tender and warm. She always made me feel like I was in the arms of a true daughter. Renee never raised her voice, never did anything that worried me. She was one of those people who just by looking at them made you feel at peace. I still remember those very windy afternoons in the suburbs of Atlanta, when I would arrive at Darius and Renee's little house. The laughter of Caleb, who had just started to walk, echoed in the backyard as he chased a colorful rubber ball. Renee would be on the porch with a basket of freshly picked vegetables, smiling as she watched her son. "Mom, Loretta, try the chili I made. See what you think," she would often say to me, her voice full of pride as she placed the warm bowl in front of me. I would sit there eating and talking with her about simple things while Caleb crawled on the floor clinging to an old toy car. But the most beautiful and also the most painful memory is the night Caleb became very sick. He had a very high fever. His little body burned, and his eyes could barely open, with no strength left even to cry. Renee held him while tears rolled silently down her cheeks. "Mom, Loretta, I'm so scared," she whispered, her voice trembling. I sat next to her, taking turns placing damp cloths on his forehead, trying to calm her. "Don't worry, honey. The boy is strong. He's going to be okay." But inside, the worry weighed on me like a stone. I stayed up with Renee until dawn, when the first rays of sun appeared, and Caleb's fever finally broke, and he fell asleep in his mother's arms. Renee turned to me, her eyes red, but with a faint smile. "Thank you, Mom. Without you, I don't know what I would have done at that moment." I just took her hand and squeezed it tightly, as if I wanted to tell her that I would always be there for her and for Caleb. I thought that this little family would be happy forever, like a song that never ends. But then one fateful afternoon everything fell apart. The phone rang while I was washing dishes in the kitchen. The cold voice of a police officer came through the line. "Mrs. Harris, we regret to inform you that there has been an accident." I don't remember how I finished hearing the sentence. I just know that my hands were shaking so much that I dropped a plate on the floor, and it shattered. Renee was gone in an instant when a truck that lost control hit her car on the highway outside the city. I stood there paralyzed, feeling the world crumble in front of me. Renee's funeral was on a day of torrential rain. The drops fell nonstop as if the sky was also crying for her. Caleb, who was only 4 years old then, was in my arms, confused, looking at everyone with his innocent eyes, not understanding what was happening. "Grandma, where is my mommy?" he asked in his little voice. I hugged him tightly, swallowing my tears, and whispered, "Your mommy is in a very beautiful place, my love." But inside I felt shattered. Darius, my son, collapsed in front of the coffin, his shoulders shaking, and he couldn't say a word. I knew he was trying to be strong, but his gaze was empty, as if a part of his soul had gone with Renee. After that tragedy, Darius changed completely. He buried himself in work. He would leave home very early and wouldn't return until Caleb was already asleep. I understood that he was running away, trying to fill that immense void in his heart with endless days of work. But Caleb, my poor boy, suffered the most. He started talking less. His gaze was often sad, as if he was waiting for a miracle that would bring his mother back. I became his only support. I took him to school every morning and sat by his bed every night to rock him. "Grandma, tell me a story about my mommy," he would often ask me. And I would tell them to him in a choked voice, talking about the times Renee sang to him to sleep, how she cut his fruit into little pieces to make him his favorite dessert. Each story was an attempt to keep Renee's image alive in Caleb's mind and in my heart. Monique, my adopted daughter, also became an essential part of those days. With her warm heart and skilled hands, she would come to the house often, bringing coloring books or cookies she had baked herself. Monique loved Caleb as if he were her own little brother. She would carry him, teach him to read, or sit for hours with him at the table to help him with his clumsy drawings. "Look, Caleb, your house turned out prettier than mine," she would say, laughing in her voice as clear as a bell. But sometimes I would catch Monique looking at Darius when he entered the house in silence after a long day of work. It was a deep look that contained something more than a simple sibling affection. I saw it, but I decided not to say anything. Maybe I was afraid that if I brought up the subject, I would break the fragile stability of what was left of our family. Darius's house slowly became devoid of laughter. But thanks to Monique and Caleb, the family flame remained lit, even if it was flickering. I did everything possible to keep that flame from going out. But in the depths of my heart, I knew that both Darius and I lived with wounds that had never healed. Every time I saw Caleb sleeping, I saw Renee's features on his little face, and my heart would ache again. The memory of that afternoon is still as clear in my mind as if time had not passed. I was sitting in my small living room listening to the sparrows singing in the yard with a heart full of mixed feelings. It was the first time my son Darius was bringing Tamika home to introduce her. I tried to open my heart. I tried to see this young woman through the eyes of a mother who wants her son to find happiness again after so much pain. But deep down I couldn't shake a feeling of unease, like a cold wind that made me shiver. That afternoon, Darius arrived later than usual. I was in the kitchen preparing the tacos that Caleb loves so much when I heard the door open. Darius came in with a strange glow on his face. His eyes lit up the way they did in his youth when he used to talk about Renee with a passion he couldn't hide. "Mom," he said in a choked voice, leaning against the doorframe, "I want you to meet someone." I stopped what I was doing and looked at him, feeling a bit of nervousness. "Someone special?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Darius smiled, a smile I hadn't seen in a long time. "Yes, you're going to like her very much," he said, full of confidence. I nodded. I wiped my hands on my apron, trying to hide the worry that was starting to grow in me. After Renee, I wasn't sure anyone could fill the void she left, not only for Darius but also for Caleb and for me. That night, Tamika appeared. She entered my house in an elegant light blue dress, her hair perfectly styled in waves that framed her face, and her lips painted a soft red that curved into a smile. That smile, I must admit, was charming, as if she had practiced it to please anyone. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Harris," she said in a sweet voice, bowing her head slightly. I returned her smile, invited her in, and served her a cup of hot aromatic coffee. "Your house is so cozy," Tamika said as her eyes scanned the family photos hanging on the wall, where there was one of Renee hugging a very tiny Caleb. I nodded and thanked her, but her eyes lingered on that photo longer than I would have liked, and I wasn't sure if I liked that. Dinner went on in an atmosphere that I tried to make as friendly as possible. I placed the dishes I had prepared all afternoon on the table. Tacos wrapped in corn tortillas, a plate of enchiladas with red sauce, and a fresh salad with mango, Caleb's favorite dish. Darius sat next to Tamika, his eyes never leaving her. His happiness was visible in every gesture. "Mom, Tamika works in marketing at my company. She's very good at what she does," he said, his voice full of pride. Tamika smiled. She served me an enchilada with a delicate but calculated movement. "Mrs. Harris, this is delicious. You have to teach me how to make it," she said, giving me a friendly look. I smiled and responded politely, but a small part of me remained uneasy. There was something about the way she spoke, the way she laughed that made me feel like I was watching a very well-staged play. Caleb, my grandson, was sitting at the head of the table, strangely quiet. He, who normally wouldn't stop talking about school, that night just picked at his food without lifting his head once. I noticed that he was avoiding Tamika's gaze, as if he was trying to hide in a safe corner. Tamika leaned over, took a chocolate bar from her purse, and placed it in front of Caleb with a radiant smile. "This is for you." "It's very good, Caleb," she said in a voice as sweet as if she were trying to win him over. But Caleb remained still, his little hands gripping his silverware, and then he simply turned his face away without touching the chocolate. I saw a flash of fear in his eyes and felt as if my heart would shrink. Darius frowned, about to scold his son. "Caleb, what's wrong with you? Tamika is giving you some candy." I quickly intervened. "It's nothing. He's probably a little tired. Leave him be, son." Darius sighed, but didn't say anything else and turned to serve Tamika more wine as if he wanted to lighten the mood. Monique, my adopted daughter, was also at dinner. She sat across from me, eating in silence, but I noticed how her gaze darkened when Tamika took Darius's hand under the table. Monique has always been a very sensitive girl, and I know she loves Darius like a brother, but sometimes I wonder if that feeling isn't deeper. When Tamika took Darius's hand, Monique's hand stopped over her glass, and I saw her fingers tighten a little. She didn't say anything. She just lowered her head and continued eating. But that silence was heavier than any words. I wanted to ask her. I wanted to understand what was making her sad, but I knew it wasn't the right time. After dinner, Tamika insisted on washing the dishes, even though I refused several times. "Mrs. Harris, let you rest," she said with overflowing enthusiasm. I reluctantly agreed and watched her go into the kitchen, roll up her sleeves, and hum a cheerful tune while she cleaned. I must admit that she did everything impeccably. The dishes were neatly stacked, and the sink was sparkling. For a moment I thought, this girl seems very caring. But then when I went out into the living room, I saw Caleb sitting, coloring, with his little hands clutching a crayon. Tamika approached and sat down next to him, praising him. "You draw so well, Caleb. What is it? Let me see." But Caleb immediately let go of the pencil and leaned back with an expression of distrust, as if she were a threat. Tamika glanced at me and quickly forced a smile, as if to cover up the awkward moment. "What a shy boy," she said in the same sweet voice. But I saw something strange flash in her eyes. Darius, meanwhile, didn't seem to notice anything out of the ordinary. He was busy refilling wine glasses, telling funny anecdotes from work, and laughing loudly every time Tamika told a joke. The introduction ended with my son completely satisfied, seeing Tamika off at the door with his eyes fixed on her, as if there was no one else in the world. I stood there watching them walk away with a strange feeling in my heart, as if something wasn't quite right. Time passed and Tamika gradually became a part of our lives. One weekend morning, with the bright Louisiana sun flooding the living room through the windows, I was knitting a scarf when Tamika appeared, smiling from ear to ear. "Mrs. Harris, I want to take Caleb to the park today. Is that okay?" she asked, her voice full of enthusiasm. I looked at Caleb, who was on the floor playing with his wooden blocks, his face expressionless. "Of course, I'm sure he'd love it," I replied, forcing a smile. Even though I felt a little doubt inside, Darius had gone to work, and I thought maybe a little fresh air would do Caleb good. Tamika took Caleb's hand and led him toward the door while I watched them go with a strange heaviness in my heart. When they returned, Tamika came in with a triumphant smile. He had so much fun. He wouldn't stop going down the slide, and he even asked for another ice cream, she recounted, her voice full of excitement. But when I looked at Caleb, I saw that his shirt was dirty with some dried dirt stains on the blue fabric that I had ironed myself that morning. He was silent with his toy car in his hand without saying a word about his outing. "Did you have fun, my boy?" I asked, crouching down to stroke his hair. He just nodded slightly, looking away. I wanted to ask him more, to know why he was so quiet, but Tamika intervened with her always sweet voice. "I already told you, Mrs. Harris, he loved it." I nodded, but inside me, A small piece of the puzzle of doubt began to form. On another occasion, while Darius was at work, Tamika showed up unannounced. I was in the kitchen preparing chili for lunch when I heard her talking to Caleb in the living room. At first her voice was soft, but suddenly I heard a harsh phrase. "Stay still, Caleb. Don't make a mess. You're a big boy now, but you still act like a baby." I stopped dead in my tracks, my hand still over the onion I was chopping, and a chill ran through my body. I came out of the kitchen, and instantly Tamika changed her tone, becoming as sweet as if nothing had happened. "Our Caleb is so clever. Look at the tall tower he built," she said, pointing to the wooden blocks the boy was playing with a radiant smile. But Caleb just pressed his lips together and looked at me as if asking for help. I tried to smile and said, "Yes, he's very skilled." But inside the unease was starting to grow like a small thorn digging into my heart. I tried to calm myself. Surely she's not used to children. Anyone is a bit clumsy at first. Caleb's 7th birthday is a memory I will never forget. Monique, my adopted daughter, spent all morning baking a chocolate cake, Caleb's favorite. When she arrived with the cake and placed it on the table with its candles lit, Caleb shouted with joy. His eyes lit up for the first time in months. "Aunt Monique, this is my favorite cake," he exclaimed, running to hug her. She smiled, stroked his hair, and told him tenderly, "I made it for you, my love. Eat a lot." I watched them with a warm heart, feeling that the family flame was rekindled. Tamika was also there, but she only clapped in a forced way, standing in a corner with a weary smile. Her only gift for Caleb was an indifferent pat on the shoulder and a "Happy birthday, champ." I saw how Caleb shrank a little, avoiding her gaze, and my heart ached again. I wanted to say something, but I stayed quiet, telling myself not to get too involved. Another time, Darius took Tamika and Caleb to the grocery store. I stayed home, but when they returned, I heard Tamika complaining in an irritated tone. Caleb dropped a whole bag of candy at the checkout, and I had to pay for it. What a clumsy boy. Darius frowned and turned to scold his son. "Caleb, you're a big boy now. You have to be more careful." I saw Caleb lower his head with his hands intertwined, and his eyes sought mine as if asking for help. I quickly approached and put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry, my boy. It was just some candy." But inside I couldn't stop wondering why Tamika got so angry so easily with the child. Why? Could she not have possessed even a fraction of Renee's gentleness? One afternoon, when I went to pick up Caleb from school, his teacher led me aside. In a hushed but concerned tone, she said, "Mrs. Harris, lately Caleb hasn't been talking as much and seems very withdrawn. Is everything all right at home?" I froze, completely caught off guard, but I tried to brush it off. "I'm sure it's just the changes, Mrs. Brown. Don't worry too much." However, on the drive home, Caleb tugged on my blouse and his voice trembling said, "Grandma, I don't want to go home with Miss Tamika." I immediately pulled over and knelt down so I could look directly into his eyes, my heart aching. "Why do you say that, sweetie? Miss Tamika loves you," I responded, hoping to reassure him. But as soon as the words left my lips, I knew I was wrong. Caleb shook his head with a surprising amount of determination in his gaze. "No, Grandma. She doesn't love me." I stroked his hair, attempting to soothe him, but deep down, I couldn't deny that the boy was telling the truth. Monique, who was standing nearby, had overheard everything. She turned away without a word, but I noticed her shoulders slightly moving, as if she were trying to suppress a sigh. All those disparate clues, all those subtle signs. I had noticed them, but I had actively chosen to ignore them. And so the day of my son's wedding finally arrived. That afternoon, the brilliant Georgia sun poured through the expansive windows, bathing the ballroom in a radiant light, almost as if it were eager to celebrate my son's special day. I was seated at table number 8 with my grandson, Caleb, and Monique, my adopted daughter. Caleb was quietly playing with his red toy car, making soft vroom vroom noises. I watched him and my heart swelled with love. Monique, dressed in a simple beige dress, was sitting on the other side, occasionally leaning over to whisper something in Caleb's ear, her smile as warm as the morning sun. "Have another little piece of bread, sweetie," she said, breaking off a tiny piece for him. I smiled at the scene, feeling a sense of comfort in my heart. Even though our family had endured so much heartache, the presence of Monique and Caleb was always the spark that kept my spirit alive. Darius, my son, looking sharp in an elegant navy blue suit, was moving from table to table, offering toasts with our relatives. His face was beaming with happiness. His radiant smile seemed to be trying to erase the painful years that had followed Renee's death. I looked at him, feeling a mixture of pride and sadness. I desperately wanted to believe that he had found genuine happiness again and that Tamika, the stunning bride in her beaded wedding dress, would give him a new home. But every time my eyes met Tamika's, who was laughing boisterously in front of the cameras, never letting go of her wine glass, I felt a small stab of unease in my heart. Her smile seemed too perfect, like a carefully applied mask designed to hide something. The gentle melody of the jazz band played in the background, mingling with the lively conversations of the guests. The waiters moved with quiet efficiency, serving appetizers, crispy crackers, a fragrant cheese dip, and plates of fresh shrimp decorated with meticulous care. I noticed that Caleb took only a single cracker, and then deliberately pushed the shrimp plate away. I frowned slightly and asked him in a low voice, "Don't you like this, honey?" The boy shook his head, averting his gaze as if he were trying to hide something from me. I wanted to question him further, but a close relative interrupted, saying cheerfully, "And Caleb is behaving so well, Loretta. Look how big he's getting." I forced a smile and replied, "He's a smart little man now." But deep down I couldn't shake my worry. Caleb had never refused food in such a peculiar way before. In the distance, I saw Tamika's gaze briefly flicker toward our table. The smile on her lips seemed to tighten almost imperceptibly, just for a fleeting moment, before she turned back to continue toasting with another guest. I attempted to dismiss my unease, telling myself I was simply overthinking things, but then everything changed in an instant. Caleb, still occupied with his toy car, pushed it a little too hard, and it rolled onto the floor. The boy quickly crouched down to retrieve it, but I saw him suddenly freeze, his eyes wide with shock, fixated on something underneath the table. I leaned over to ask him what was wrong when Caleb pulled out a small piece of paper, folded into fourths with trembling hands and a pale face. He immediately grabbed my hand and whispered urgently, "Grandma, let's go. Please, let's leave now." My heart began to pound as if it were trying to escape my chest. "What's wrong, sweetie?" I asked, trying to maintain my composure. But Caleb's panicked expression made it nearly impossible to stay calm. Trembling, he repeated the question that sent a chill down my spine. "You didn't look under the table, did you?" His words were like a cold blade that paralyzed me. I crouched down, lifted the white tablecloth, and scanned the dimly lit space beneath the table. The small piece of paper was lying next to his chair, a seemingly harmless object but radiating an unsettling aura. I picked it up with shaking hands, feeling the world shrink around me, leaving only Caleb, myself, and that damned piece of paper. I unfolded it. The candlelight was sufficient to read the hastily scribbled words. "Table, add shrimp to the child serving." Just a few simple words, but they struck me like an electric shock that surged through my entire body. I instinctively crumpled the paper in my hand. The music, the laughter, everything around me seemed to fade into an abyss from which I couldn't escape. Tamika, in her dazzling wedding dress, continued to laugh in a corner of the ballroom, raising her glass to toast with a guest, as if nothing in the world could possibly trouble her. Darius was busy posing for photos with his coworkers, wearing a radiant smile that seemed to confirm that this was the happiest day of his life. But for me, everything in that ballroom had suddenly become a charade, a deceptive facade concealing the terrible truth I had just uncovered. I squeezed the paper tightly, feeling it burn against my skin. Caleb, the grandson I loved more than my own life, had almost become the victim of a malicious plot, right here on his father's wedding day. I turned to Monique, my adopted daughter, who was sitting next to Caleb. Her eyes were filled with concern when she saw my expression. "Take care of Caleb, please," I said, trying to sound calm, although I knew I couldn't completely hide the tremor in my voice. Monique nodded, pulling Caleb closer to her and hugging him tightly, like a protective shield. "Where are you going?" she asked me in a hushed voice laced with anguish. I simply shook my head without answering, because I didn't even know what I was going to do next. I hurried out into the hallway, my legs feeling heavy, as if they were weighed down with lead, but with my heart pounding, urging me to take action. Near the bar, I noticed a group of waiters chatting amongst themselves. Their laughter sounded like a cruel contrast to the storm that was raging inside me. I recognized Marcus, the young man who had brought the food to our table several times. He had a kind face and a friendly smile, but at that moment I couldn't bring myself to focus on that. I walked straight up to him, thrust the paper in his face, and demanded in a firm voice, "Do you know who sent this note?" Marcus looked at the paper, and his face instantly changed. His carefree smile vanished, replaced by an expression of panic. "Oh my God, this is my paper," he stammered, his hands trembling as if he wanted to grab it back from me. "A woman gave it to me, and I accidentally dropped it when I was carrying the tray." His words were like a glimmer of hope amidst the confusion, but they also agitated me even further. "Who gave it to you?" I insisted, almost shouting, completely losing my composure. Marcus took a step back, looking bewildered. "I don't know her name, ma'am. She just told me to give it to the chef. The paper didn't say who sent it." Rage exploded inside me like a wildfire. "All the more reason," I retorted, stepping closer, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. "You need to know my grandson is severely allergic to shrimp. A single piece could kill him." Marcus turned pale, his eyes wide with horror, and shook his head frantically. "Ma'am, I truly didn't know. I just followed the note. I had no idea about anything." His voice cracked as if he too were trapped in this nightmare. The other waiters began to whisper among themselves, exchanging concerned and curious glances. I squeezed the paper in my hand, feeling it burn my skin. I wanted to scream. I wanted to destroy everything. But I knew I couldn't allow my emotions to get the better of me. Caleb was waiting for me, and I had to protect him. From inside the ballroom, the MC's voice cheerfully announced that the guests should prepare for the main course. His voice was like a cruel reminder that time was running out, and if I hesitated, a deadly trap could be waiting for Caleb. I took a deep breath, attempting to control the trembling in my body. I knew I couldn't remain silent. If I didn't act right now, I would never forgive myself. I returned to the ballroom, still clutching the paper in my hand as undeniable evidence of a sinister plot. The ballroom was still bathed in candlelight, and the music of the jazz band mingled with the cheerful laughter of the guests. The waiters quietly served the main courses, and the aroma of roasted meat and gravy filled the air. But for me, everything was a charade. I looked at Caleb, huddled next to Monique, his clear eyes full of fear fixed on me, as if I were his only safe haven in the midst of the storm. I took Caleb's little hand, feeling his trembling fingers in my palm. And then, as if driven by an invisible force, I stood up abruptly, my voice ringing out clearly and firmly above the music and the conversations. "One moment, please. Before we begin to eat, I have something I need to bring to everyone's attention." The entire ballroom fell silent as if time had stopped. All eyes were on table 8, where I was standing with Caleb by my side, and Monique sitting with a spark of determination in her eyes. The clinking of glasses ceased, the murmurs died down, and I could only hear the pounding of my heart in my chest. I held up the paper. The words scribbled on it were an undeniable accusation. "Who wrote this note asking for shrimp to be added to the food of the child at table 8? I asked, my voice trembling with indignation, but forcing myself to speak clearly and sharply. Whispers began to circulate, like small waves on a calm lake. Some guests exchanged glances, shaking their heads with expressions of curiosity and confusion. I felt Caleb's gaze fixed on me, as if he were begging me to do something to protect him. Darius rushed over from another table, a smile on his face that quickly turned to concern when he saw my expression. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, looking completely bewildered. I didn't answer him immediately. I simply placed the paper on the table and pushed it towards him. Read it yourself, I said in a harsh voice, although inside I was a mess. Darius picked up the paper. His eyes scanned the words, and I saw his face turn pale and his hands tremble slightly. What does this mean? He asked, stunned, looking at me and then at Caleb, as if searching for a logical explanation. Tamika, in her dazzling wedding dress, approached, frowning with a perfectly feigned surprise. What is all this? Some kind of bad joke? She said in a soft voice, but I detected a flicker of panic in her eyes. I looked at her directly, my heart gripped by anger and fear. My grandson is allergic to shrimp, I said, my voice trembling with indignation. This is not a joke. This is an attempt at murder. My words landed like thunder, plunging the ballroom into a deathly silence. Some guests' mouths dropped open in astonishment, while others began to whisper, their eyes darting between me and Tamika. Tamika let out a forced laugh, a mask to maintain her composure. Excuse me, Mrs. Harris, but there's no name on the note. Are you really going to believe a story made up by a child who found it? She said with a mocking tone, attempting to make me look like a paranoid old woman. Some guests began to comment doubtfully. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. Who would do something like that at a wedding? The blood boiled in my veins. Tamika's audacity left me almost speechless. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear off that wedding dress to expose the truth. But I knew I had to remain calm for Caleb, for my family. Suddenly Monique stood up, hugging Caleb tightly, her eyes narrowed and fixed on Tamika. That's enough, Tamika. Her voice sounded cold but filled with a restrained pain, as if she could no longer contain herself. Monique stepped forward and slapped Tamika across the face, a resounding smack that echoed throughout the ballroom. The sharp, startling sound shattered the silence and the falsehood. Everyone froze, including me. Tamika put a hand to her cheek, her eyes wide with shock, and then turned to Darius, sobbing. You see, she's crazy with jealousy, and that's why she's attacking me. What have I done to deserve this? Monique didn't back down, her fists clenched and her voice breaking with rage. The only wicked person here is you. You wanted to harm an innocent child at your own wedding. Her words were like a knife that cut through the heavy atmosphere of the ballroom. The looks of doubt began to shift toward Tamika, and I saw her freeze, her false smile fading. Darius was motionless. His gaze went from me to Monique and Tamika, as if he were caught between two conflicting realities. Monique, calm down, he said in a trembling voice, but I knew he was no longer sure whom to believe. The murmurs of the guests grew louder, like a tide that carried all eyes toward me, toward Tamika, and toward Caleb, my little grandson, who was trembling in Monique's arms. Tamika tried to maintain her false composure, but I saw her hands shake as she spoke. This is slander. I'm sure someone put that note there to ruin our wedding. Her voice was sharp, but I noticed the panic in her eyes, as if her perfect mask was starting to crack. I couldn't stand her audacity any longer. The anger inside me exploded like a fire that consumed all my patience. I slammed my hand on the table, making the glasses rattle. That's enough, I shouted in a voice so cold that it silenced even the music of the jazz band. Marcus, come here. The young waiter Marcus approached from a corner, his face pale with fear. His eyes darted from side to side as if he were trapped between the truth and the storm that was brewing. I showed him the note, my voice trembling but firm. Confirm it. Is this the note you received? Marcus nodded repeatedly, stammering. Yes, ma'am, it is. A woman from the other table gave it to me, and I accidentally dropped it when I was carrying the tray. He lowered his head as if he wanted to avoid my gaze. I felt my blood boil, but I forced myself to remain calm, because I knew everyone in the ballroom was watching. Tamika hurried to interrupt in a sharp, almost desperate voice. You're mistaken. I don't know anything about that. But before she could respond, a weak voice filled with pain was heard from behind. Brianna, Tamika's younger sister, burst into tears and stood up from her chair. It wasn't my sister Tamika who gave me that note, the young woman said, trembling as tears streamed down her cheeks. She asked me to give it to the waiter. I swear I didn't know what was inside. A gasp of astonishment swept through the ballroom. "Oh my God, I can't believe it. How is that possible?" I looked at Brianna and my heart softened. She was barely 18 years old. Her eyes were red and filled with confusion, as if she too were trapped in this nightmare. Tamika turned sharply and yelled at her sister, her face contorted with anger. "Shut up, Brianna. How dare you make up lies to hurt your own sister?" Her voice was sharp, but I saw her lips tremble, as if she were struggling to conceal the truth. Brianna backed away, trembling from head to foot, and said between sobs, "I'm not lying, sister. I just did what you asked." Her words were like a dagger that pierced through Tamika's falsehood, leaving the entire ballroom in a state of shock. An elderly relative shook his head. His voice choked with emotion. "How is it possible to not even spare an innocent child?" In the midst of the chaos, Monique stepped forward, hugging Caleb tightly, and said in an icy voice, "If you keep denying it, we can ask to check the security cameras in the ballroom. Everything will be cleared up in a moment." Her words were like a stone thrown into a lake, causing waves of panic. Tamika's face turned ashen, her lips tightened, and her gaze desperately searched for an escape. But there was no escape now. She didn't say another word, and that silence for me was the clearest confession of all. Darius stood frozen, his hand trembling on Caleb's shoulder, looking in horror at the woman he had just married, Tamika. His voice cracked, as if he were trying to cling to the hope that it was all a misunderstanding, but his gaze, moving from the note to Caleb, said everything. I saw how his heart broke, just like mine had when I discovered the plot. An uncle stood up and shook his head in disgust. "It's unbelievable. Such wickedness on a day of celebration." His voice trembled as if he were holding back his indignation. After Monique's challenge about the security cameras, a deadly silence settled over the ballroom. Tamika, the woman I had once tried to accept as part of my family, stood there, her face pale and her lips pressed together, searching for one last excuse. But the truth had been revealed, and she had nowhere left to run. Darius, my son, walked slowly toward her, his face tense and his eyes red, and asked her, "Tamika, tell me the truth. Is it true?" His voice trembled as if he were begging for a glimmer of hope that it was all a mistake. But I knew that deep down he also felt the painful truth. Tamika took a step back, trying to force a twisted smile, but her eyes betrayed her panic. "You don't believe me?" she said in a broken voice, as if trying to cling to the last shred of Darius's trust. "It's all their plan. I didn't do anything." But her words sounded weak, like a wind about to die out before a storm. I looked at her, my heart heavy with indignation and pain. This woman, who I thought would bring my son happiness, was now standing in front of me like a stranger, a danger I hadn't seen before. Monique, my adopted daughter, put a hand on Darius's shoulder and said in a voice that she was controlling with all her might, "Caleb almost died because of this woman." Her words were as sharp as a knife. Tamika yelled desperately, "Shut up. You're just a jealous intruder." But Monique didn't flinch. She was trembling with rage but stood firm, like a shield protecting Caleb. "How dare you call me jealous?" Monique responded in an icy voice. "Look this child in the eyes and tell me you didn't try to hurt him." Caleb clung to me, his little hand squeezing mine as if he feared being pulled back into that nightmare. The guests began to stand up. The festive atmosphere had completely vanished. A relative of our family, Mr. Carter, slammed his fist on the table in anger. "This is a disgrace. We can't let this go unpunished." Murmurs of support were heard, like waves that grew and drowned Tamika in everyone's looks of contempt. Darius, trapped between truth and love, cried out, his voice broken with pain and indignation. "Caleb is my son. You tried to kill my son at our own wedding." His words were like a direct stab to Tamika's heart, and I saw her burst into tears. But those tears, I knew, were not of remorse but of being exposed. I placed the note on the table and declared in a firm voice, "Anyone who tries to harm my grandson will never have the right to set foot in this family." My words rang out clear and unyielding like a sentence. Tamika looked up, her eyes full of fire, but I saw defeat in her gaze. She had lost not only to me but to the truth. The hotel security personnel approached and, in a polite but firm manner, asked Tamika to leave the ballroom. "Ma'am, please come with us," one of them said in a cold voice. Tamika backed away, looking for help, but no one sided with her. Many guests shook their heads, leaving their half-empty glasses and sighing with resignation. "Unbelievable," one whispered. "How can someone be so cruel?" another said, horrified. Darius stood motionless, his hands on his head as if trying to keep his world from collapsing. Then, as if he no longer had the strength to stand, he slowly knelt in front of Caleb, his voice choked with emotion. "Son, forgive me. Forgive me, my boy, for not protecting you." I saw tears run down his cheeks, and I felt my heart break in two. I helped Darius to his feet, squeezing his shoulders, and said in a grave but confident voice, "Luckily, we stopped it in time. This false happiness has to end here and now." I looked at Tamika, who was being escorted out amidst the contemptuous stares of the guests, and in my heart, I knew that she never was and never would be a part of this family. In the days that followed that disastrous wedding, my family was caught in a silent storm, where wounds continued to bleed and unanswered questions lingered in the air. It felt as though I had just awakened from a terrible nightmare in which I nearly lost Caleb, my precious grandson, whom I love more than anything in the world. The story of the ruined wedding spread far and wide, from the quiet streets of our suburb to the whispered conversations of distant relatives. Our house phone never stopped ringing. Some people blamed Darius for blindly trusting Tamika, while others expressed sympathy for Caleb, the innocent child who had almost become the victim of a cruel and evil scheme. But for me, each phone call was just a painful reminder of the horrors we had experienced. Darius became withdrawn and subdued after everything that happened. He was no longer the bright and cheerful man in the navy blue suit from the wedding day. Instead, he quietly took Caleb to and from school each day, his eyes filled with pain and regret. The name Tamika, like a curse, was never spoken in our house again. I watched Darius with a heavy heart, but I knew that he needed time to heal, to rediscover himself after being betrayed by someone he had loved and trusted so deeply. I couldn't blame him, because I understood that love can sometimes cloud people's judgment. But I also knew that our family had to pick itself up from the ashes. I kept caring for Caleb just like I had ever since Renee left. I cooked his favorite meals, things like cheesy pasta or a nice soft pudding, trying to give him back some sense of security. But who really healed Caleb's soul? It wasn't me, it was Monique, my adopted daughter. Every morning, she would carefully pack his lunch for school, being super careful to choose foods without shrimp or anything else that could be dangerous for him. She would even write a little note for his teacher explaining Caleb's allergy, along with a smiley face drawn with a crayon, which he absolutely loved. "Aunt Monique, you draw so well," Caleb would shout when he opened his lunchbox, and I would see his eyes light up like a little piece of his innocence had come back. Every afternoon, Monique would take Caleb to the park nearby. I used to watch them from a distance, seeing how she taught him how to fly a kite, showing him just how to hold the string so it would fly up high. One time, Caleb fell off the slide and Monique ran right to him, picked him up, brushed the dust off of his clothes and whispered, "It's okay, sweetie. I'm here." Caleb's clear laughter echoed, a sound I thought I had lost forever, and now it was like a balm for my heart. I looked at Monique with so much gratitude because she wasn't just a sister to him, she was also like a second mother, filling the empty space that Renee had left. One night when Caleb had a really high fever, I saw Monique spend the whole night by his side. She sat in a chair next to his bed, putting cool, damp cloths on his forehead while she quietly told him the story of a brave little sparrow that flew through a storm. I stood at the door just watching in silence, and I noticed that Darius's gaze followed Monique for a long time. It was a complicated look, full of both gratitude and remorse, like he was realizing something that he'd been ignoring for a long time. I didn't say anything. I just backed away quietly, giving them their space. But in my heart, I started to hope that maybe there was a light at the end of our family's dark tunnel. One night during one of those rare dinners where we were all sitting together around the table, enjoying the warm pasta I had made, Caleb suddenly looked up, his clear eyes locked on Monique. "I want Aunt Monique to be my mommy," he said in a soft but very clear voice, like it was something he had been thinking about for a long time. Everyone at the table went completely silent. Monique blushed and looked down, holding onto her spoon tightly like she was trying to hide how embarrassed she was. Darius froze, his eyes welling up with tears as if Caleb's words had struck a very deep chord in his heart. I smiled. I put my hand on Darius's shoulder and said in a warm voice, "Real happiness, son, doesn't come from some fancy wedding, but from a genuine heart that knows how to love." Darius looked at me, then at Monique, and I saw a tiny spark of hope light up in his eyes. Time went by and Tamika disappeared completely from our lives like a toxic wind that had just blown away. Caleb became a happy boy again, always stuck to Monique with his little red toy car and the drawing she made for him. I saw him running and playing in the yard, and I felt such a huge relief, but also a little pang of sadness, thinking about everything he had had to go through. One day Darius took Monique's hand. He suddenly stood in front of me in the living room and said in a trembling but firm voice, "Mom, I know I made a mistake. I was blind. I put Caleb in danger. But this time, I don't want to let go of the person who has truly been there for our family." Monique lowered her head, her cheeks bright red, but I saw a huge smile on her lips. I nodded as tears silently ran down my cheeks. "Son, the only thing I want is for you and Caleb to be happy," I said, my voice choked with emotion. That night, after Caleb had fallen asleep, I sat by the window, watching the silver moon shining over the quiet street. Its soft light was like a reminder that even though our family had gone through some really dark times, light always finds a way to break through. Tears welled in my eyes as I whispered to myself, my voice trembling with the weight of everything we'd endured. Family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's chosen with love and courage. After that awful wedding, a new chapter full of light had truly begun for my family. I looked out toward the yard where the kite that Monique and Caleb had flown the day before was still lying there. And I knew that even though the old wounds might never fully heal, we would keep going on together with love and strength to support us. After going through all of this, I realized something really important. That in life, there are losses that you can't replace, betrayals that break your heart, but genuine love will always be the light that guides you. Family isn't just built with blood ties, but also with choices, with the courage to protect each other from darkness and danger. It's the sacrifice and real affection that bring lasting happiness, not fake appearances. I want everyone to remember to listen. You have to let your heart be your guide because sometimes a little act of kindness can save a life. And it's kindness that helps us get through those nights that seem like they'll never end. The story you just heard has had the names and places changed to protect the privacy of the people involved. We're not telling this to judge anyone, but with the hope that someone will listen and take a moment to think. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes? I really wonder, if you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have chosen to stay silent to keep the peace? Or would you have dared to face everything to reclaim your own voice? I'd love to know what you think because every story can become a candle that lights the way for others. God always blesses us, and I'm sure that courage will lead us to better days. And now on the final screen, I'm going to leave you with two of the channel's most popular stories. I'm sure you'll be surprised.